Welcome to the Find My Catalyst podcast. We all have problems we're looking to solve, and we know that there are solutions out there, but we struggle with this. How do we find that solution? Where does the nudge come from to help us take that next step and start solving tough problems? The intention of this podcast is to help you find your catalyst and take that next step. I'm Mike Simmons. I'm the founder of Catalyst Sale. I am joined by Glenn Pasch. I was recently on Glenn's podcast, You're in Charge. We'll include a link to the show notes of that podcast episode. Really excited about this conversation. This conversation, along with all of the other conversations you hear on the podcast, are brought to you by the Find My Catalyst game plan. It's our approach to goal setting and execution. It helps you build out your own systems so that you can start executing against those goals that you've defined. It simplifies the process. If you'd like to learn more, head to findmycatalyst.com. Let's get to the conversation. Glenn, it is awesome to see you again.
Yes.
I was recently on the You're in Charge podcast, and that's how we met. And we met through Bree, who had actually recommended that you have me on the podcast. And I think we had an awesome conversation. It was so good that I wanted to bring you on the Find My Catalyst podcast. So thanks for joining me today.
Oh, no, it was great. I agree. I think we had a great conversation, and it's always nice to ask, people for recommendations. And, Bree, who I just adore, and she's been on the show as well. Just your name came flying out of her, Twitter as quickly as she could type it.
She's a very, very good person. She does a lot of work for us, both on the Catalyst sales side of things and the Find My Catalyst sales side Find My Catalyst side of things, as we kind of get our footing going as we're moving into 2022. So what inspired you to create the You're in Charge podcast?
Well, I've been in, running teams and leading teams in different companies through, for my whole life. Always seems like I was ending up being in charge of teams. But a lot of times I was never taught or trained. I was thrown into it, figure it out yourself. So I made a ton of mistakes. I always joke, I've made some mediocre teams really great, and I've taken great teams and made them mediocre. And I saw this even currently, in my agency, we do a really good job of training. But as I would go out to some of my clients and work with them, I would see that same thing. Someone would get promoted because they're good at X, let's say sales, right? You take a great salesperson, they're one of your top people. And now all of a sudden you say, great, you're going to be the sales manager. You're going to be in charge of the team. It's a completely different skill set. And a lot of times they flounder. So I said, well, what if I created a podcast that talked about that? How can we help people? Like, you're in charge, and as soon as you walk out after the promotion, you go, now what am I supposed to do? How do I do this? And so I started bringing people on like yourself to say, okay, if you're going to run a sales team, what are some things you would learn? Or if you're going to be in charge of marketing, or maybe you're in charge of a project, what are some skills that you could share so that someone listening would say, oh, that's great. So that's what we've been doing, for the last year and a half, and been getting a lot of great feedback on that. Was really helpful. That was really good, because I really try to drive into tactical conversations versus theoretical.
Back when I used to travel a fair amount, one of the first podcasts I started listening to was the HBR Idea Cast. And that was my introduction into podcasting. And there was so much great information that could be shared via audio quickly that I could listen to on an airplane. I could download a couple of episodes. These days I'll listen to podcasts while I'm working out, whether they're podcasts or audiobooks. And sometimes at different points, I'll go a bit deeper into things like audiobooks. I'm listening to Hero with 1,000 Faces, which is absolutely awesome. The Joseph Campbell book from back in the 40s.
Yes, love it.
Go way back. So
yes,
but there's this great content that's out there. And one of the cool things about podcasting is it's provided an opportunity for people new in their career, new in their role, making a transition to develop themselves and take ownership of their own employability, take ownership of their own success. And that is what I think is really cool about what you've done with the You're in Charge podcast. You're enabling people to take control of their own success rather than be dependent on an organization delivering leadership development courses that end up being like this big flash rather than something that's ongoing and is applied inside the culture. So thank you.
Yeah, no, I agree. And I think you make a really good point. Is a lot of times training, I always say they forget the second word, which is development. So a lot of companies and organizations are great at front end training. So if you're a new hire, you're coming in, or maybe when you're promoted, they'll give you a course or they'll send you to a seminar for a weekend or a week even. The problem is when you come back, no one's helping you implement those ideas or looking at those ideas and saying, well, that works for our company, but that doesn't work for our company. Or here's how I would adapt it and implement it. And part of their job when you're running a team should be to coach and develop their team. The problem is no one's coaching and developing the coach. And that's where I think that disconnect is. And I agree, there's so much great information now, but still it's that implementation where people either give up or struggle or don't know how to apply it. And I think that's where there's a huge upside for companies to think long term of how I'm coaching the coaches.
There's a study by Binkerhoff that talks about scrap learning. It's an older study. Might be 60s, 70s, 80s. I forget the time frame. We'll figure out a way to include a link, but it talks about the concept of, or the idea of scrap learning. And the whole idea there is that you go through, you get this great information, you get energized, you're excited about it, you are engaged, and then you go back to work and you just start doing the same things. You don't actually apply the learning. And learning without application is really, I was going to say meaningless, but there's some learning that you'll get that you don't want to apply, meaning you just, it doesn't resonate with you. It doesn't work relative to your approach. It's not the right fit. So as you listen to podcasts like this one, like Glenn's podcast, think about how can you apply that specific piece of information, that nugget of practical information, the tactics inside your business, and then start testing rather than just aimlessly listening because you're taking up time. If you don't actually apply, what's the Yoda quote? There is no do. There is no try. There's no try, do, or something like that, right?
Yeah, do or not do. There is no try. And to your point, for what we do in our company, right? So we're a full service digital marketing agency. And there are times where, we host events, but we also send our employees, they'll say, well, I want to go to this social media event or I want to go to this conference, and we send them. But part of that deal is you come back and present to the organization what you saw, what you learned. It could be reinforcing, hey, we're on the right path. Or it could be, hey, this is new coming down the pipeline. Let's discuss this. How do we adapt this? Or no, we don't want to. And I think that is key because it will help you. If you send someone to a course or someone's listening to a podcast, or even if you're the business leader and you say, I want to try this, we'll get people in the room and say, I was listening to this. What do we think? Now, again, there are going to be times where your team is going to say, please stop listening to podcasts, or please stop, because every day you're coming in with a new idea. But I think it's really important to also get feedback to say, this is a great idea. Can we use this in our company? If we say yes, how are we going to implement this? How are we going to test? How do we know what's working or not? Versus you coming back from a conference and come in and we're changing everything, and you just flip the table over and your employees hate the fact that you're going to a conference and they're dreading what's going to happen when they come back. Versus, to your point, is a very thoughtful conversation, a thoughtful implementation, and then measurement to actually see how to use this information. Or else you're right, you're just listening to stuff. And a lot of times, the more you listen to it without implementation, you're going to get frustrated, or you're going to start thinking, wow, I'm so behind, or I'm a loser, or I'm not doing something. And that almost can discourage you from getting too much information without any implementation.
There's a really important leadership lesson in there as you've gone through and described it. And it's this whole idea of creating shiny things and chasing after the new idea, whatever new idea it is. And if you go back to the Marie Antoinette quote, there's nothing new but what we've forgotten. So it's not like there are a lot of these new ideas. You've just got to, but you might hear something for the first time, say, well, that sounds kind of interesting, then rush to implement it. And by constantly distracting your team with new ideas, you create a level of confusion where people start to wonder, are we going left? Are we going right? Are we going center? Now are we going left? Have we turned around and gone backwards? And I think a good way to visualize this is think about being at the helm of a ship, and you've got this spotlight, And if you've got this spotlight that's pointing toward wherever it is that you're going, you know what your direction is, you know where you're going, and you have a team or teams inside the organization as flashlights within the spectrum of that spotlight. And then the work that they do, the individual day-to-day stuff are laser pointers. You can start to visualize how all of these things should be aligned. Well, if you as the leader hear something new and all of a sudden go 90 degrees to the left, and then hear something new and go 180 degrees back to the right, how much time will it take for those flashlights and laser pointers to catch up? And before you know it, the front of your ship looks like the 4th of July because you've got laser pointers and flashlights, and nobody wants to do this thing because they say, well, this too shall pass.
Exactly. Exactly. I had it. It's very funny you say that because I went into a client and started working with them. And I came back it was like a monthly visit. So I came back the second time. And they hadn't really implemented some of the things that we talked about. And so I sat a few of them down and I said, why are we not implementing? And one of the people looked at me and said, oh, you're back. And I said, well, yes, I'm going to be working over the next year. And they said, oh, well, you see, we don't, quote, this is what they said, we don't implement any of these ideas at least for 60 days because our owner always has a new idea. So they basically were saying, we're not going to put in our time and effort into something that could be changed in 30 days, right? So when I sat with the owner and I said, I love your ideas, but we put in a structure to change it. So I'll quickly map it out. We started thinking, I always reverse engineer.
Good.
So I said, okay, how do you want let's start with the customer. Customer does business with you. When they're finished, how do you want them to feel? Okay. Now, a step back from that is, what does your team have to do? Actions in order to create that feeling for the customer. And he started mapping them out. I said, great. Now you take all that. Now we'll build processes so everyone remembers that. He said, perfect. I said, now a step back from that is, now we have to go look for technology to help your team execute those actions to deliver the feeling. And in case of a website, what technology can your consumers use to have a good experience? Now we move a step backwards from that. And now we have to continue to train on it and develop them and measure. And he goes, okay. And he mapped it all out. I said, now here's the key. Anytime you have a new idea, you have to see where in this thread does this idea or change happen. Number 2, is it replacing something you're currently doing? Or is it an add-on to what you're doing? Once you get that, then you say, okay, if it's replacing, now you're starting to make the decision. Why are we changing? Is it a better change? We have to analyze this. We have to have conversations. If it's add-on, where does it add on? Who's going to own it? How are we implementing it? How are we training our people? What timeline? And all of a sudden, when he started seeing that, he realized all of the confusion and chaos and lost productivity he was creating because he, one, didn't have that end-to-end to begin with, so that you could target where in that chain. Does it affect customers? Is it technology we're replacing? Is it technology we're adding on? Are we adding more staff? Are we changing how we do? Whatever it was. Once he had that locked in, he actually told me 3 or 4 months later, you actually have saved me time. Because when I started putting those decisions through that filter, a lot of them never saw the light of day because it sounded good at the conference. It sounded good from the salesperson's pitch. But when I actually thought, does this help what I'm trying to do for my customers? A lot of those things sounded good, but they're not right for my business. Somebody else could use this, but it's not right for me. All of a sudden, that lens, he was so relieved because he had a system for making decisions, and it just opened his eyes. And his employees appreciated it. Their productivity went up, and a lot of wasted time, or even conversations of saying, do I even want to go down this path? That was what he appreciated most, was I had control of my time and decisions again.
Why do we struggle with this? Like, why do we struggle? So this all makes sense. I mean, we're designing backward so that we can execute forward. We can start to get a lay of the land and see some things. Why do we struggle with this idea around decision, or excuse me, not even an idea. Why do we struggle with decision making so that we avoid challenges that are going to be created for organizations downstream because we're just putting ideas out there rather than making decisions to stop or cut off. So why do we as leaders in businesses struggle with decision making?
I think there's a couple reasons that I've seen or even myself have dealt with. I think that one, there is time. We're always in a rush to sell more, have to move under pressure, feel we're going to pivot, we're going to lose an opportunity or an advantage or something along those lines. I think that's one. I think number two is I'm not sure a lot of companies have actually built out that linear equation that I said, really understand it so that they have a frame of reference. But I really think the third thing is a lot of business leaders, especially smaller businesses, entrepreneurs, they're risk takers. They move fast. They're not operational. CEOs and leaders that come through with an operational mindset of, well, how do we build this? How do we do this? Have a tendency to slow down a little bit. I'll give you an example. My brother and I, who are partners in our company, he is definitely more visionary, meaning he sees things. He's just got his foot on the gas. When I came and joined his company, I saw, because I am more operationally built, that's what I do. And I've always been COO more than a CEO. And I said, well, this is going to fall apart because you're on to the next thing and you haven't even built what you currently have, a structure to build on. It's going to fall. So I built the structure and we've been successful. So we joke about it. He'll have an idea. He'll throw it over his shoulder. I'll catch it and go, okay, do we want to do this? Yes, we do. I'll build it. So I become the brake to his gas. But on the same moment, he's taught me how to speed up or to take a little more risks. And everything doesn't have to be perfect before we go. Seth Godin has in one of his books, he talks about saying that you have to have a ship date. Whatever shape it's going to be in, that's the date. And it's as good as it's going to get on that date. Ship it and move. You can learn later on. I think it's Linchpin is his book. That's the book, Linchpin. And he always talks about having a ship date, or else you can overthink, overanalyze, and never produce because it's never perfect. So I think that really is the key of making sure there's someone in your company, if that's not your skill set, to build so that you have that roadmap, who's going to question, who's going to put it through a filter. And then once you have that, even entrepreneurs, once it's built, because they don't know how to build that, they have that, they'll use that lens because someone built it for them.
That's a pretty powerful thing for folks to take away is if you don't have the ability to build the lens, work with someone who can help you build the lens. And likely you've got a member of your team, somebody inside the organization who's aware of what's happening in the business, who is applying this perspective to the work that they're doing operationally in order for your business to continue to move forward. So you might have that internal capability. You may not. It all depends on the makeup of your team. But take the time to create some of that balance, the balance of thinking. Yes, it's important to do. It's important to have timelines so that you know where there are stakes and there's some kind of this sense of urgency inside the business to help move things forward. Because as Glenn said, you will never have all of the information. Things will never be perfect. You'll never have all of the data, and you can get into analysis paralysis really, really quick. And I'll go back to the quote in Free Will, the Rush song. Even if you choose not to decide, you still have made a choice. So if you're not deciding on something, as you continue to push things on, you're still making a choice. You might be hurting your business. So Glenn, let's talk a bit about your business. So what do you do inside organizations? What's the gift of your business?
Well, we are, as I said, digital agency. So we really focus on helping companies understand their brand. And that's a word that gets thrown around. But more importantly, we know how to market it. So we're going to help them optimize their website from a strategic and a UX user experience. Then we market. We do full, SEO, paid search, social media advertising, content creation, video marketing. Our job is to make the phone ring. Our job is to get people to the website. Our job is to track it so that you can see if they're not converting, so to speak, by saying, I'm ready to buy today. Are they exhibiting shopping behaviors? Are we at least getting people there who are looking through your products, looking at your pages somewhere? And that's one of the conversations we have in the beginning. If someone is interested in your products and services and came to their website, what would they be doing on your website? Right? Oh, well, we work a lot with automotive dealers. So they would say, well, they go to the trade-in page. They're looking at inventory. They're looking at pre-approval pages. Maybe they're looking at the search. Okay, well then let's track that, because not everyone's going to give you their name because they're not ready today. But the fact is, the people that we're sending to you are showing shopping behavior. That's what we do. And then on the other side, the other part of our company, we do a lot of education. So we host 2 large marketing conferences each year, one in May. It's called the Digital Marketing Strategies Conference. It's in Napa, California. And then we do one called the Modern Retail Conference, and that's in Palm Beach in November. Plus, we do mentoring programs. We're doing one currently where people will send, it's remote, but they'll send their marketers or their managers who need to understand marketing so they can talk to their vendors. And then, so we'll help with that. And I go into some of my clients to help them with process development and organization and leadership training, because we feel that we could drive all of this traffic and you could, phones ringing and people are raising their hand. But if you don't have processes internally to deliver that, well, then your marketing, in some ways it helps us reinforce client retention because we're helping them execute on the marketing that we're driving there to their website and, phones and even in the stores in that case. And we'll go there and help them. So that's what we really do. And we've been around for about 15 years and we have about 45 employees and we're remote now. We used to be, we were based in New Jersey and in Florida. My brother lives down there, but we're remote because we can do, the pandemic helped us actually in some ways hire and attract some really great people who just didn't want to move to New Jersey. So that's been a big benefit.
I lived in New Jersey. I don't want to move back to New Jersey. It's a beautiful
Where did you
state.
live again? I forgot. I think we talked about it.
I used to live in Wayne. For about 2 years, I was up in Wayne. And if you watch the beginning of The Sopranos, that's kind of what the neighborhood up in that area kind of looked like. You had these rolling mountains, a lot of trees, and we weren't that far from the city. But that's we lived in Wayne, and then we moved to Southern California. Spring break my freshman year in high school, and moved to Southern California. So when you think of just everything that you've described related to how you think of marketing and how you think of customer experience and what you're designing out there, what's changed? And when you see Glenn, you'll notice Glenn has gray hair. So he's been around a little bit. I mean, he also said that that the business has been around for 15 years. But what has changed in the last, let's just say 5 years from a marketing perspective that gets you excited about where we're going?
Well, I think that part of what gets me excited is that it's constantly changing. There is this evolution of content is out. People can have access now to everything. If I stick with most of my clients, let's say automotive dealers, 10 years ago, 8 years ago, even 5 years ago, customers, there was this transition of understanding that I can get the information about the car. I can understand everything. I can find out all about financing and I can find all that information online. I didn't have to come into the dealership. Mm-hmm. So some of the pivoting now from marketing is no longer just price, $199 lease, $399, whatever. You really have to start advertising your process, how I'm going to take care of the customers, what happens when you come in. If you submit your name, here's what's going to happen. And here's why we're better. A lot of why you should buy from us. And that's just not the marketing catchphrase of we've been in business for all these years. It's actually what you're doing. And I think a lot of organizations, businesses are starting to realize they need to humanize their business. Who's the face of your business? We see a lot more salespeople doing videos or communicating. You see that across I have a local bakery who I love their stuff here in Lawrenceville in New Jersey. It's called the Gingered Peach. They're great online. They show you how they bake the cakes. They're showing you constantly communicating visually so that you say, ooh, I want to go there. And so companies are starting to break down that wall and understanding that customers now are willing to communicate in a lot of different areas. So one of the things that I think companies really have to focus on, I wrote an article on LinkedIn on my newsletter about it, which is called conversation optimization, because there's so many places now where a customer can communicate with you, right? They can come to your website, they can call you, put in a form, but most people don't want forms anymore. So what happens is if I put my name in a form, I have to wait for you to call back. Well, now you have chat. On top of that, now it's FaceTime or live video, or now I'm on Messenger or I'm commenting on social media. And so that's where a lot of this it's become so fragmented. There's a lot of cool places that you can advertise, but every platform's a little different. But the key is for you as a business owner, it's helping to educate them and saying, are you present? Your salespeople could be creating great TikTok videos and everyone's loving it. But if somebody asks a question, is someone there to answer it? And are they answering the way that you want them to answer as a business owner, right? We do a lot of Facebook advertising. Well, now I can go on to Messenger and, the phone has really made it so convenient to communicate, but a lot of it now has evolved where people don't want phone calls. I mean, I'm not sure about you, but I always ask when I teach or I go do workshops or speak at conferences, I ask them, how many people like getting phone calls anymore? And so many people are going, nope, I don't want to. How do you like it? Text. I said, okay. And then I pivot and I say, okay, how many of you are training your salespeople to make phone calls? Everyone's hand went up. And I said, do you understand what you just said? You said that I don't like getting phone calls, but I'm holding my salespeople accountable to making 50 phone calls every single day. So I'm training them now on an old process. So same thing with marketing. Where are the ads now with privacy, right? So people opting out, the iOS 14 updates and, Google taking away some tracking. A lot of people are saying, all right, marketers, you sort of screwed it up, right? I want to control when you talk to me. Okay. So now we have to pivot. We have to start really taking care of our customers. We really have to retain our customers, where before we'll just track them around the web and they'll see our ads all over the place. And eventually, that's the whole funny thing that people always say. It's a great thing until the marketers show up. They're going to screw it up eventually. So I think that's really the change for businesses, is understanding it's evolving. You got to be quick and you got to have a partner in an agency that's going to help you. They'll take care of what it is. You can't. And the last thing, and then to wrap this part up, is there are companies that offload their marketing to an agency and go, good, I don't have to think about that. No, you have to. I need you as a business owner to explain to me, who are your customers? Where should we go? Where I can do it. You don't have to tell me what to do. I know what to do, but I need your help as a partner to say, this is working. This is not. Hey, we have a college here. This is who we want to attract. That's my customer. This is what I want them to do. Then I can take over. But that has to be a monthly conversation to make sure that what we're doing is working, or else I can look at a map and guess. I can look at your website. I can guess, but is that really what you want to spend your money on? Or do you want to have an active partner in your marketing to help you so that you can focus on what you do, which is sell your stuff?
I think the couple of things, just as you to break down a couple of the pieces that you shared there, and a lot of the similarities that we see on the sales side. One is the importance of consistency across that entire journey, like you talked about earlier in the discussion. So if you've not mapped it out, how can you expect the experience to be consistent if you don't know what the experience is? And
Yes.
Many times we don't know what the experience is, either because we didn't walk through our own experience. We didn't go start at the beginning and say, hey, how is someone actually going to discover us? And then what are they going to do next when they get to this place? And think about it in the context of your house. What happens when you open the door and someone walks in? Where do you want them to go? Do you want to draw them toward the kitchen where there's going to be food and maybe some drink and entertainment? Do you want them to be aware, or you want them to go down the other end of the hall and find themselves in a bedroom? Like there are experiences that you want to create, but you've got to think through those. So you've got to pause so that you can take the time to think through and design for these experiences. And one of the biggest struggles that I've seen out there in the market is this assumption that people are going to buy like me, or people are going to care about the problem as much as I care about the problem, or people are going to just understand and be able to make these giant leaps rather than be nurtured and have someone kind of hold their hand and walk them through, or make it easy for them to find certain pieces. So there's an experience piece that's important from a design perspective.
Yeah, I mean, and on that point, if you think about it, I challenge my clients all the time. When was the last time you bought your own product?
Right. Yeah.
When was the last time you shopped on your own website? You need to have those conversations. To your point is, an advertiser could think, well, when they click on this ad, I'll send them here. Well, is that the right place? Like, you should be involved, where you should say, well, if they click on this, I want to send them here. Okay, great. Well, you can have that conversation, then we can measure it. But there are so many people, because either you have marketers or you have people your websites or you have other people in those positions, your customer journey could be Frankenstein because everybody's put those pieces on very much like we were talking earlier. Everyone kept adding on. No one thought to replace. Do we have products on our website or tools on our website that are duplicate or could conflict or could cause problems? Or if, to your point is, if somebody clicks on this button to chat with somebody, who's answering the chat? Are they qualified to answer that? Do they even know what they're supposed to say? Or to your point, which I loved, is there a consistent response? If there's 5 people who answer that potentially, are they all saying the same thing? Or is it Glenn's version, Mike's version, Bob's version, Mary's version? And that's, again, goes back to the customer experience. You're starting to create these inconsistencies and friction points because then it's, well, I thought they said, they told me, instead of everyone singing off the same song sheet.
And then what happens to trust?
Oh, out the window.
Right.
Because if they feel that way on your website, if you're frustrating them on your website, they think, oh, this is the way it's going to be when I get there. Even if they don't leave right from the beginning, but if they go, well, I need to, or I got to go. But now it's, oh, okay, now I got to fight through this. Or maybe it's great on the website, but when I talk to someone or I show up at your place of business and I've submitted things to you, right? I gave you my name and maybe we had a conversation. The two of you and I had conversations through email or on the phone and I feel good about it. But when I show up, am I talking to you or am I talking to someone else? If I'm talking to someone else, are they aware of the conversation that you and I had? Or do I have to start back at square one again? And now it's frustrating. Then why did I even talk to the person previously versus picking up where they left off to make a smooth experience? And so you're right. I see your whiteboard behind you. I don't think a lot of times everybody whiteboards it out or they go back twice a year. Let's just take a refresh. Did anything change? Are we still doing what we're supposed to do? Or have people drifted off because I found a little shortcut?
Well, I mean, think about the experience auto dealerships have had over the last, let's say, 18 months.
Sure.
And what's happened from an inventory perspective. I had to bought a used truck in September. The absolute worst time to buy a mini pickup truck in as long as I can remember. I don't remember another time where it was this hard to get a hold of a vehicle, where prices had increased so much. And I get it. It's a supply and demand kind of thing. But if you're still creating the same, operating based on the same experience in September of 2021 that you were using in September of 2019, something's going to break and people are going to be frustrated with the experience. You're not coming to a dealership and walking around and seeing 120 cars on a lot or 200 cars on a lot. They're coming out and seeing 5 or 10. And a lot of them are used vehicles. So if you're not constantly going back through and reflecting on this, you're putting your business at risk. How often do you recommend to folks that they reflect on their business? How often do they revisit this kind of stuff? How often do they go to the whiteboard and kind of map through things and start to see if things are changing?
I would say you better do it once a year. I think a lot of people do that. How did our year go? But I'm not sure how many go deep enough to say why. If we were successful, what did we do? See, a lot of times it's very idea-based or theory-based. I'm from the mindset always of actions cause results. So if we did more, we generated more revenue. What did we do? What were the circumstances? So in your example of automotive dealerships, in New Jersey in 2020, a lot of them were shut down, couldn't go in. So everyone had to do things online. So a lot of technology came out to put some control in the consumer's hands, but a lot of times it was just over email, over the phone. We could negotiate really quickly. We could move this through, and then you pick up your car, sign your papers, and off. Now, a lot of that has customers liked it. Some didn't like it because I like the test drives. I like doing that. But the piece of speeding through the buying process, they liked. The question is, what did we learn, and are we still able to do some of that? But more importantly, those people that bought, when they come back 3 or 4 years, they're going to expect something similar. You can't go back to, oh, this is going to take 5 hours to do. So I would say, I don't see any reason why you wouldn't do it twice a year, just to have a touch point to say, what did we do? If we change something, I think if you have that sort of decision tree that we talked about earlier, you already know what you're changing and why you're changing it. Now you really should be measuring it. But I think it's a level set of twice a year to just say, how are things moving? But being really aware of actions, because in this case, if the manufacturer inventory caused certain things to go up, well, what did we learn? Well, we also learned maybe in our sales to hold firm on our price because there weren't a lot of options. Okay, well, what happens now when I have more inventory? Do we stay in that realm? Do we change? What worked? What didn't? I think you have to be hyper aware of outside influences, your own actions, because you're not going to remember 2 years from now, 3 years from now. So you better have good notes, because you're going to look back and say, man, we were killing it back at that time. What happened? I don't know. Oh, I think it was. No, you could go to your notes and say, no, this is exactly what we did. This is what happened. Here's how we adapted. Or on the flip side, we're not selling more, or we're not doing this, or we're falling off a little bit. What's in your control? What's out of your control? And then again, going back to putting actions in place to the things that you can control. You can't control the chip shortage. It is what it is. But I can control maybe going direct, like our clients, we pushed out early on. If you're complaining that the prices were at the auction to go buy a car are very high, go direct to the consumer. Oh, I never thought about that. Great. Let's build campaigns to go direct to consumer. Now everybody's starting to do that. And because it was working, because people didn't realize I could go sell my car to a franchise dealer. The Ford dealer down the street will buy my Chevy because they want a Chevy used car. If it's in good shape, they'll buy it. So I think that's where keeping notes, because if all of a sudden auction prices go down, does that mean I stop doing the direct to consumer model? No, keep doing that. And now I go back to the auction and do a little more and I can get my inventory. So I think it's the more we understand the actions that cause our results, then we can make decisions of, do we continue or do we stop? But at least we know what we are doing versus theoretical or blaming outside influences.
This is where, to Glenn's point, there's such an importance on documentation and being clear about what you're documenting and how that changes over time. And when you start to change what you document over time, realize that's going to push you back relative to the trends that you're going to be able to evaluate downstream. So if you're constantly shifting, like the business leader that we were talking about who hears new things on podcasts and now says, we should be tracking this and we should be tracking that and we should be tracking this, you're never going to allow the data to start to become informative. You're just going to have a number of different data points with a lot of stuff around. It's kind of like, that saying about how to eat an elephant, one bite at a time.
One bite at a time, sure.
You can eat an elephant one bite at a time, sure. But if you go after a herd of elephants, eating them one bite at a time, what's going to end up happening is you're going to have a lot of irritated elephants and they're going to drive your business absolutely nuts.
Sure.
And we laugh about it, but we fall into the trap of, hey, wouldn't it be nice if we could capture this? Or wouldn't it be great if we could capture this? And then it turns into, well, how did that look over this long period of time?
But to your point, taking that documentation a step further, because I agree with you, I think a lot of people don't document. So when you're making that change is fine. But is someone going again, if we're going to do this, then we have to build a process and then we have to train people on it. And then we have to hold people accountable to this. So the question is, if I'm not documenting the process in actions, if I don't map it out and say, here's the 5 things now we do this, we do this, we do this, we do this. So that it's very clear. Or else if I just stand in front of the room, the salespeople will use sales. Sales is the salespeople are going to interpret for themselves what you're saying. And the picture in my mind is going to be different than the person standing in front of the room. Then when they come back 2 weeks later, they're frustrated because they're going to say, well, you're not doing what I told you. And then, I thought that's what you said, versus if it's physical. I always say, if you can't stand up and do it, then it's not clear enough. So if I want to change how we answer the phone, if I'm standing up and telling someone, oh, I need you to be more positive. I need you to be more energetic when you greet our customers. What does that mean? But if I said, no, I want you to get out from behind your desk. I want you to walk up to them. I want you to shake their hand. I want you to bring them back to the desk. I want you to sit down. Or if this is the way you answer the phone, let's practice the script, right? Then if I come back to you later on and you're not doing something, I could say, Mike, you were just doing it. Last week, we did it together. What happened? Oh, I'm sorry, I drifted off. Okay. But if not, that's where I think a lot of frustration in companies come from, is that there's not, even if there is documentation, a lot of times it's not actionable documentation, it's theoretical documentation. And now I'm leaving my team open to interpreting, thus leaving me open to frustration down the road and also wasted productivity because we didn't do it correctly in the beginning.
Well, and you highlight the where communication comes into play. I mean, there are things that are said, there are things that are heard, and then there are things that are remembered. And rarely are you going to find those same things, other than the thing that was said, that's going to be consistent. You might even have it on a video. You might have a recording. There's a record of the thing that was said. As far as the heard, it could be a number of different people hearing different things. And if everybody's hearing something different, how is everybody going to remember that? And I think this reinforces the importance of the distinction between training and coaching. Yes. Training, showing, demonstrating, leading people through things. Coaching, observing, nudging people in the right direction. I think about, I grew up playing ice hockey as a little kid and then football in high school. There are some amazing coaches that helped me do things that I didn't notice until, I saw a video, or they would talk about things like foot position. But these are things that they are able to help me with because they have a different perspective than I do.
But notice what you just said, though. They noticed, but then they showed you. They said, no, move your feet this way.
That's it. Yep.
Right? They actually physically. Now, sometimes there is, if you think about it, that's the way we've been taught our whole life. You're in school, when you're in grammar school, they're teaching you how to, right? Remember, they used to have the letters and you would have to physically follow something to teach you how to do that. And they watch you, and here's how you hold the pencil, and here's how you do that. And the teacher was watching you and coaching you and showing you. And even in high school, yes, it got a little bit more on you to read and understand, but they were still showing you. Here's how, correcting your report, sitting down, let me explain this to you until let's watch you do it over and over. And sports became, for a lot of people, very important. But for some reason, as soon as we go into the adult world, we stop teaching that way. We do a lot of telling because we're adults and we should understand or we should know. But yet all of us have been either on the receiving end of, well, that's what I thought you said, Mike. I thought that's what you meant. Or you've said it because for some reason we don't want to take the time to show someone. But again, and that's why I love the analogy of coaching, because I say it a lot of times. Where was that coach for football at practice? On the sideline. What were they doing? Watching. Sometimes they'd walk out in practice and physically move you. No, over here. Where were they when you were playing the game? On the sidelines, watching, right? Whatever sports team you love, if you turned on the TV for a game and the coach was not on the sideline and they interviewed the coach later on remotely, why are you not there? Oh, they're professionals. They know what to do. You'd think the coach has lost their mind and you're going to say, fire that person. They're an idiot. But yet in business, we all become managers, and managers sit behind desks, right? Think about that. When you say coach, you go, oh yeah, they're here. I like coaches. Managers, oh, I don't want to talk to the manager. They're never out here. And that's a key too. If someone's leading a team and you're in charge of a team, how often are you actually out watching them play the game? So if it's a sales team, are you watching them when they're interacting with their customers? Are you out on the sales floor, right? Out there with them? Are you listening to their phone calls? Are you watching what they're doing? Or are you just looking at the end result numbers and then having a conversation? Mike, you got to pick up your numbers. Come on, Mike, you got to sell more, Mike. And Mike's going, I have no idea what I'm supposed to do. And so you go back and you try harder on a bad process, bad footing. Bad footing's not going to get better on my own. I need somebody to physically turn my feet. And then I go, oh, and then stay with me as I implement that. And then all of a sudden now I can run faster because my feet, I'm stronger in this position. Great. Now I understand it. That takes time. And a lot of companies, a lot of people, for whatever reason, either, well, I didn't get it, so why should I do it for someone? Which is a stupid, in my mind, a stupid way to think. Yep. Or no one ever showed them how to do it. And so again, going back to, they're just trying to figure it out on their own. And so their example was, somebody yelled at me, so I'll yell at them. Somebody My manager sat behind their desk. I'll sit behind my desk. I have an office now. Yay. Think more coaching. Think running your business like a sports team, like a high school football team. What would you do? You'll be better off and closer to being more successful with that thought process than being in love with your title and your parking space and you sit behind a desk. You're away from the playing field. You don't even know what's going on. And then you get frustrated.
And if you're away from the playing field too long, sometimes the game doesn't look like it did back when you played.
Yeah,
there was a time when they didn't have the forward pass. And so like you've got to get into the operation. You've got to get your hands dirty. You've got to get out.
You don't want to be that person where they say the game has passed this person by.
Right.
And sometimes your business passes you by, or someone in a position, it's passed them by. Not their fault. You didn't help them stay current. You didn't help them stay up to date. And if you're at the top, who are you surrounding? Where's your team that is mentoring and coaching you? Right. So it could be, in some businesses, they have what they call 20 groups or mentor groups, or like who else in your industry could you talk to say, I'm thinking about XYZ, and they go, well, here's my opinion. Right. But to your point is now there's podcasts, there's great leaders out there sharing information. So it's really contingent on you to make sure that you're doing that. But, it's lonely at the top until you realize it shouldn't be, because there's a lot of people out there who are willing to help you.
Well, and there's a lot of balance in these things that we're talking about. So, when we started the conversation, Glenn talked about just throwing people out into the deep end from a leadership perspective and allowing them to kind of figure it out. They were really good as an individual contributor. They'll make a great leader. Then they go in there and they try to turn everybody that they're leading into them. And what's amazing when you see this in early career sales leaders, so that first sales manager, sales team lead type job, they get involved in calls with their reps and members of their team. And then they want to lead the call and they want to do the work and they want to go in there and do it. Now, nobody's learning. Yeah, someone can see, they can observe that this is how someone would navigate it, but that's not their personality. That's not their approach. They're not going to be that person. And the leader gets frustrated because then they're saying, well, I've showed you how to do this. You've not been able to do it. Or then the leader walks away and feels like they're the knight in shining armor that comes in and wins the deal and does all of this stuff. Stop doing that with your team. You're only holding them back. And there's a better way to do it. And this is where this coaching piece really.
But a lot of times that person, so it's funny you touched on that as well, because it is that first time you're a leader, and I've seen it even experience people, they create a dependent team. No one can do anything without them. So they're going to ride in, like you said, the knight in shining armor. I'm putting on my cape. I'm super person here. But that's not building a team. The other piece is, you were saying, is there's a lot of frustration. Why don't these people get it? I got it. Why aren't they able to do it? I told them once. That's not, coaching is a completely different skill set. And probably a lot of people who are top performers, very, very rarely have I seen a top performer become a great leader of a team. Like Michael Jordan couldn't coach. His patience level wouldn't put up with it. Nobody worked as hard as him. They couldn't do it. Not everyone's you. So I've been asked many times, well, how do you find that person? And I said, well, there's one thing that's always helped me was, okay, you're running the team. You go on vacation. Somebody has a question on the team. Who do they go to? If they're struggling with something, who do they go to? Why are they going to them? 1, they know. 2, they're patient. 3, they're approachable. They're helpful and they like them. Those are skills, sets, traits, characteristics of a great team leader. Most of the team leaders that have been successful are usually in that top 25%. They're in that 80% range of productivity. A little spike up, but they're consistent. They know all the processes. They follow everything. But more importantly is they're willing to help and they're patient. They come across more of a teacher. That's where I always say, like, I'd start there as at least interview those people. Now, your top people, if you're going to hire a top performer to be your leader, you have to do a lot of work with them to help them become that leader, because left to their own devices, they're going to piss off your whole team. You're going to get frustrated, or they're all going to become lazy because that person's going to do the savior routine. But then that means that person can never go on vacation, can never leave the building because the salespeople don't know what to do because, well, Glenn won't let me do anything. Everything has to run through them. So a lot of, not saying they can't, but it's up to you to really build them up to help them through that, especially the frustration point. Frustration questions, really hard for a lot of them to get past.
Mindful of time. We're just hit the top of the hour. How are you liking the conversation?
I'm loving it. This is fun for me. I think it's what a lot of companies, again, going back to what we were saying earlier, a lot of companies don't either have the time or don't think they have the time, or this is going to take a lot of work, or why should I do this for them because they should know. All of these are wrong ideas in my opinion, because if I have that decision tree that we talked about earlier, I know where things go. If I have a process to train and develop people, if I have a process of how do I change things, and then more importantly, if I have that process of coaching people and developing people, I should be fairly successful. But again, it's part frontline, but it's consistency long-term of just that's the job of the team lead. Every day they coach and develop. What else are they doing?
Glenn, this has been an amazing conversation. One of the things I really enjoyed and appreciated, found value in when I had a chance to be on your podcast is how you pulled together points. You synthesize things into smaller chunks. And I said, wow, I wish I had you kind of walking around with me in a lot of the conversations that I have. So given the range that we've had in the conversation, what stood out for you in the discussion? How would you bring things together?
Well, I think there's two things for business leaders, and either you're at the top of the organization or this could apply to your team, is really map out that decision, work backwards. What do I want my customers to feel when I'm done, when they leave doing business, that they purchase from me and they leave? How are they going to feel? What do I have to do, my team? What actions do we have to do to make them feel that way? Then building that into a process. Then we have to train them on that process. And then what technology is going to help them do their job. And then we're monitoring results and being open to tweak. Because then once you have that, any change you want to make, technology, new idea, you can pause for a moment, look at what you're currently doing and saying, is this an add-on? If it is, where does it fit? How do we implement? Do I have a process for that? If it's changing, why am I changing? What's the upside of changing? What's the downside of change? So it's all of this slows you down to have thoughtful conversations. So that would be one. And then the other piece is that idea of coaching. Doesn't matter. You could be in an accounting office. You could be, it's not just sales. Everywhere in your business, there is those processes that we talked about of people doing their job. Who's watching and coaching and giving feedback on how to get better? Not just from an individual standpoint, but then you can look from department to department to department, because one decision in one area is going to affect someone else. And are we mapping that all out? And I think that constant idea of coaching and developing and monitoring and looking at your numbers, very similar to looking at videotape of how we played. I think those two aspects, will help any organization be more productive, because you're in control every day and doing actions that are going to help your team move forward every day. And you're not going to make these hasty decisions that maybe it'll work, maybe it won't. But to your point is, I don't want a herd of angry elephants in my building or people leaving because they're frustrated of, I don't even know what today's going to be. Every day it's something different. No one wants to work in that type of atmosphere.
Awesome. Glenn, where can people find out more about what you're working on and connect with you?
Oh, great. Thank you. You can just find me on any social media platform. I spend a lot of time on LinkedIn and Twitter where we met. It's just Glenn with 2 N's and Pasch, my last name. You can find the podcast anywhere you listen or on YouTube. It's called You're in Charge with Glenn Pasch. And then also my company, PCGdigital.com. That's our agency. So if you're looking to have anybody look at what you're currently doing, advise you on what you're doing, or if you're looking for an agency, we're there as well. But I'm very active. And again, if you would want to connect and you have a question, I'd be more than happy to reach out. I definitely reach out and answer anybody who reaches out to me.
Awesome. If you know of somebody who would enjoy this conversation or benefit from this conversation, please share it. Let Glenn and I know, both via LinkedIn and Twitter. We're both pretty active there. Sales is a thinking process. How are you thinking differently about yours?